Let's try to execute our continuous training, continuous deployment pipeline. Let's imagine, for example, that we have received a notification from the continuous monitoring tool saying that our model performance is degrading. So we want to retrain our model, for example, using new data that have been collected since the training of the model deployed in production. For the retraining of the model and for updating the existing deployment, we can use our continuous training and continuous deployment pipeline, clearly. This operation can be done manually by a member of the MLOps team, but this depends on the specific requirements, because it's possible also to make it completely automatic by implementing an automatic trigger as a response to the notification coming from the continuous monitoring tool. For this demo, we will execute the pipeline manually. So let's move into the machine learning operation resource group that we have created to keep separated all the items belonging to the machine learning operations. For running a code in AI Core, we know we need to create first a configuration. So let's move into configurations and let's create a new one for our pipeline. This operation can be executed only one time in the beginning or every time it is needed, for example, when the pipeline changes, because in the end also the machine learning operations code is something that you will need to maintain and that can change in time, probably less often than the machine learning solution, but it can change as well. Let's create a configuration. Let's assign a name to it and let's choose a scenario from the list. The one we are interested in is the scenario for the MLOps. We choose the version and then we also choose the executable. We can choose the executable from this list where we have all the executables for all the pipelines foreseen in the MLOps infrastructure. We choose the one for continuous training and continuous deployment. We click next and then in this window we can assign the value for the configuration parameters. We can keep the default for the current deployment ID and also for the metric threshold. We can decide to go with the registration of a new training dataset, and for that we pass basically the path in the S3 bucket where the new training dataset is, and we set to known the training dataset ID. We can click next, and in this screen, we are required to choose the input artifacts needed for this pipeline. First of all, the dataset to be used for testing the deployment. We can choose, for example, an input artifact that we have previously registered for this purpose. And then we need to say where the needed credentials are, for example, the service key to create the AI Core API client. As I said, these are stored in the same S3 bucket. Once we are done, we can review the configuration and we can create it. As you can see, now we can start an execution by simply pushing this button here at the top right of the window. Okay, so let's start the execution, pushing the button here at the top right of the window. The execution is created in the MLOps resource group, and we can follow its execution from the logs here. We can refresh the logs in order to see that it's actually started. For example, we can notice already that the pipeline downloaded already the testing dataset and also the JSON files for the credentials from the S3 bucket. And at this point, we can follow the operations triggered by our pipeline from the dev resource group, where we have the running predictive pipeline corrosion model. From the datasets section, we see that the new training dataset was registered already, as expected. And if we move to the configuration section, we can also see that for this training was created also a new training configuration. If we now move to the execution section, we can see our retraining is already running. We can follow also the retraining from the specific logs available in the in AI Launchpad. Now, with the magic of video editing, we can fast forward and move to the final steps of the training and see, for example, that the training is completed and the code is saving the retrained model locally. Now that the retraining is complete, after a few seconds, we can check that the new model is registered here automatically under the model section. This retrained model will be deployed in a moment with a testing deployment. If we move to the deployment section under the dev resource group, we can notice a deployment already running. That one, that is the one we would like to update. And so we can notice also another one that is about to start. That one is the test deployment for our retrained model. This is the testing deployment, our continuous training, continuous deployment pipeline started for testing purpose. We can follow from the logs also the test deployment execution. So here you see that it downloaded already the new model into the mount models path. Once the deployment is running, it will be tested with the test dataset we provided. The test deployment is now up and running, and here you see its deployment URL. We didn't have the chance to see it, but the test was performed internally by the continuous training, continuous deployment pipeline. And now the test deployment is being stopped since it is no more needed. At this point, we see that the update of the existing pipeline corrosion model deployment is started. We can follow also this operation from the logs. If we move to the configurations section again, we can check that our pipeline created a new configuration for the serving application where it is specified to use the retrained model as input, as new input artifact. We need to just wait a bit, a few minutes, and after a few minutes we can see that the deployment of the pipeline corrosion model is again up and running. But even if we don't see it, under the hood, this time the serving application is serving the new trained model. So in the end, we executed the entire workflow with one click without creating any disruption in the service. If we now go back to the ML operations resource group, we can see that our pipeline is being completed. We can check again the logs, and after a few seconds, we will see the execution is in state completed. So our continuous training, continuous deployment pipeline is completed.